No, I'm kidding. I'm kidding. Yeah, these front row seats here. All right, so does everyone have a seat who's looking for seats? I know there were a few folks who walked up tonight and they didn't get a ticket. Oh, there's some seats up front there? Yeah, I see about 3 or 4 over there. Yeah, I see some seats over there. And if we're... Well, it's not that kind of meeting, ma'am. I'm just kidding. I'm just kidding. Boy, it's great to see everybody. I see a couple of seats. So is there anyone who needs a seat who doesn't have one? If worse comes to worse, you could probably, yeah, I see one here, one here. I think we're okay. We had 500 seats that were sold. And as you saw when you bought your ticket online, we had 3 prices. We had $15 for what I call severely normal Albertans. We had a price for what we call independent journalists. They're pretty much the same, I think. Right on. SAIT, right? Thank you. And then we had a price for the media party, CBC journalists. And it was $40. I thought, I'm just getting my own money back. I don't feel bad about that. Now, by the way, we sold 3 of those. So be on your toes, everybody. Oh, I'm joking around. We got to educate them. We got to show them what it's really like. We're live streaming things because we want the world to see, not just the 500 folks in this room. And I thank you very much for being here on a chilly night when you could have done so many other things on short notice, and it's a little bit slippery on the roads there. I'm going to introduce our panel and tell you about our agenda in a minute, but first I want to start this in the manner that I have been starting public events for pretty much 30 years now. I'm that old. Keean, when I was just a teenager, if you can believe it, I helped chair meetings for the old Reform Party. It's where I got to know some of these folks in this room. And we had a tradition to start with the Canadian anthem. And I know that that's one of the subjects we're going to be talking about today. Will this province in a generation still be singing the Canadian anthem or something else? But I think the answer to that is we are Canadian now. Being Canadian is what made us who we are. The freedoms of this country give us the freedom to challenge the problems of this country, of which there are many. And should Alberta seek a different future, it will be peacefully and democratically by virtue of the fact that we come from Canada and not some other awful place. And so we will sing the anthem today because Canada stands for much more than just Justin Trudeau, I can assure you of that. Now, when an Alberta anthem is written, and maybe we already have one, Alberta Bound or Truckin' Convoy. That's a good one. Maybe Coulter Wall, Brad Wall's son, who's just a great country musician, maybe he'll write an anthem. I can assure you, if there's an Alberta anthem, we'll sing it too. But until then, will you please rise and join with me in singing O Canada? And I need y'all to sing to cover up how awful my own singing is. Ready? O Canada, our home and native land, true patriot love, in all our sons command, with glowing hearts we see thee rise, the true north strong and free, from far and wide, O Canada, we stand on guard for thee. God keep our land, glory of Thank you very much. Well, I'd like to invite my friend Sheila to come up front if everything's in hand with the live streaming. We'll be live streaming on YouTube. And our friends from SAIT are here, and feel free to record things, tweet things, anything you like. I want to tell you what the role is of Rebel News. I think it's a role that other media could be playing, but they won't. And that is to be the house or the host of this conversation. There has to be a conversation going on about Alberta and the West Place in Canada, because there's a lot of problems. We all know that. You can't deny that there's problems. There's very many problems. And yet to merely express that there is a problem and seek a solution, whatever that solution is, we don't even know what form it might eventually take. To merely question it, you're called all sorts of names. You're attacked personally. You're called a bigot, a racist. You're called a nationalist in a bad way. I don't even know how that word has turned into an epithet. Your personal history is doxxed, and you're personally attacked in a manner that no other group with a legitimate, let alone an illegitimate grievance, has done to it. Quebec separatists, Quebec sovereigntists, when they come forward, they're treated with the great respect, the greatest extra respect, extra care and handling. But someone expresses a discontent in the West, and they're immediately attacked not just by political rivals, which is to be expected, but by the media that claims to be the way we as a nation talk things out. I've especially been disappointed in the last month to see how the CBC and the Toronto Star, but the CBC worse than any, have sneered at and attacked people. And the attacks are one thing. I mean, I think Westerners are sort of used to that. But the saying fake friends and real enemies, that's the CBC for you. They're real enemies of the West. I mean, for example, for decades, they've allowed an anti-oil sands lobbyist. David Suzuki's foundation had half a dozen registered anti-oil sands lobbyists while he was given pride of placement on the CBC lineup for decades. How does that even work, that a registered lobbyist against the oil sands can be with the state broadcaster? Well, there's your giveaway. It's a state broadcaster. Real enemies for sure, but the fake friends that I see published in the CBC. Oh, dear Albertans, we deeply care about you, and we feel for you, and can you guys just get with it and phase out the oil sands? All of their "we love you" op-eds seem to end that same way, don't they? By telling us that we're the problem. I think the role of Rebel News is to host the debate in a way that allows people to express themselves and to find the answers without attacking people, without demonizing people. That should be a role that other media play, but I don't think they will, especially if things start to get moving. I think you'll see a lot of corporate media turn against it because there's just too much at stake. I'm not going to get into my speech yet. I'll explain the agenda. But I'm going to talk about what lessons WEXIT can learn from Brexit, and even from a word I made up today, Quexit, Quebec's attempted exit. What can Wexiteers expect? I've tried to do some thinking about it. But first, let me tell you what I propose to be our agenda for today. We started a little bit late because we had a big crowd, so I'll try not to talk too much. I think you know me. I think there's someone here who knows me. We've got a great panel tonight. I'm going to start from the far end and move in, and I'll just briefly name them now, and I'll give a better introduction before they come up. Keean Bexte is the newest reporter of The Rebel. Keean, the fact that you have such a warm applause after being with us for only about a year and a bit shows that you have made a big difference in a short amount of time. And wouldn't you agree? Put your hand up if you saw Keean scrum Greta Thunberg, the child actor from Sweden. Look at that. Look at that. Over 1 million views. The only journalist I have ever seen to try and somewhat succeed in asking accountability questions, not just of the child actor, but of her handlers and pageant dad and the whole, and there was a BBC producer for the reality show. You're the only one who blew the lid off that in the country. Keean's doing just great. Next is my dear friend Sheila Gunn Reid. One foot in the oil patch, 1 foot in agriculture, a little bit city, a little bit country. I think you are the human personification of this province in so many good ways. You care about the things that this province cares about. You're a tough cookie, but you're not mean. Sometimes you could be a tiny bit meaner. And you have single-handedly broken more scoops, especially about Rachel Notley, than any other reporter in this province. It is no coincidence that shortly after Sheila published her best-selling book, The Destroyers, which did the first vetting of Alberta's NDP by any media, that Rachel Notley sent an armed sheriff to block Sheila from the legislature. You know the saying, no one shoots at a dead duck. No one blocks an irrelevant, impotent reporter. That's why they come for Sheila time and again, and that's why we stand by her. And thank you for standing by her. And my next friend is Lorne Gunter. He's not a rebel officially, but he's a rebel in spirit. Now, I shouldn't say that too loud, because there's some folks who might not, but we love you. And you have been a supporter of Rebel News, and you have been a supporter of Western conversations and Western interests going back to the time of Ted Byfield's Alberta Report. It's difficult sometimes to be a dissident. That's another way of saying rebel, really. And on issues, especially one of your fortes, taking on the theory of man-made global warming and all the junk science and junk economics, you probably don't know how hard that is to do in your walk of life. But I can assure you that being a journalist who refuses to bend the knee to the orthodoxy of global warming and the UN that promulgates it is an exceedingly hard road to choose. And Lorne Gunter has not bent the knee, and I thank him for that. And I'm very grateful that he has the platform he does, because he speaks to many people who would never even tune into Rebel News. He gets to them through his position, and we're very grateful he is where he is. I'm grateful to call him a friend for more than 20 years now. So here's what we're going to do, it being 6:30. I'm going to invite my friends to make 6-minute opening remarks. It's not too long, but it's enough to stretch your legs a bit on this issue. And then we're going to do another round of 6 minutes where you can react to each other. Now, in between, I'm going to steal a minute or two myself. And then we're going to open it up to the audience, to you. And there, I'm going to ask you to try, please, to keep it to 30 seconds. Not because I don't want to hear from you longer, but because there's 500 people here, and I'd like to get through as many people as possible. I want to say one last word about protesters. We may have protesters here tonight. They also may be CBCers. It's hard to tell the difference sometimes. And I don't mind. I don't mind. Because I want to answer tough questions. I don't want them to be disruptive. Yesterday there was a fella, paid his $15, came to Edmonton, asked a couple prickly questions, and then he just sort of stormed out, and I tried to answer him after he left. I wish he would have stayed, because when you're testing out new ideas, you want to know the flaws. You actually really do. You actually want to know the weak spots, so maybe you have some thinking to do. So there may be some protesters here today, and my approach is ask your toughest question. Make your toughest point. I'm glad we were not deplatformed as the left does so often. In fact, some folks here will remember about a month ago we tried to have a book event at the Plaza Theater, and we were deplatformed by some radical leftists. So I'm very grateful to the Carriage House Inn for allowing this debate to take place. So we're going to start on the far end with my friend Keean Bexte, who will give his remarks on WEXIT for 6 minutes. Thank you.
How's everyone doing? Now, yesterday I had an excuse. I told everyone I wasn't really prepared because right before the WEXIT panel, I was at the University of Alberta. Deplatforming. All right, can you hear me? So yesterday I had an excuse. I was following Ron MacLean trying to deliver our petition. We had 90,000 signatures that we wanted to give to him so that he knew exactly how many fans he disappointed when he didn't stand up for Don Cherry. So that was my excuse for being unprepared yesterday. Today I don't really have an excuse, so I'm just going to wing it. You know, I'm not a huge separatist, I have to admit. I'm a reporter, and what I like to do is ask questions. I like to get answers, and I like to do that so that I can show the world, you know, some deficiencies in some people's thinking or their actions. So I want to start with asking everyone here in the crowd a few questions. They're pretty simple. And then I'll ask the same questions later. First, I want to know how many people in this crowd speak French. So just under 5%, I would say. Now, I want to know how many in this crowd think that Alberta would be better off outside of Canada. That's a lot. Now, how many of you, of those folks who said you want Alberta outside of Canada, how many of you would want Alberta to be an independent country? How many want to be the 51st state? Yeah. Okay, so we have some talking to do. Now, those who said you want an independent state, I'm going to ask two questions. Do you want a monarchy or do you want a republic? All right. I'm glad I asked that question now because yesterday at the end of the meeting I said, well, I think we should have a monarchy, and everyone booed me. I never felt so. So I think that there's problems in Confederation. I think that Alberta doesn't really fit in with the rest of Canada, but I think it extends farther than pipelines and oil and carbon taxes. That's not why I would consider myself a borderline separatist now. Not that I am, but it's not why I'm thinking about it. I was thinking about it long before the carbon tax, and it's because there's a structural deficiency in our representation in our Confederation. I'm going to read you some numbers. Of the Prime Ministers of Canada, and there's been just over 20, guess how many have come from Alberta? Well, it wasn't just Stephen Harper. We also have Joe Clark. So I'm not sure if that's a claim to fame or not. There was 3 Prime Ministers from Alberta. There was 2 from Saskatchewan, even less. But when you, and Diefenbaker. From Quebec and Ontario together, of the 23 Prime Ministers I think we've had, 17 have come from those 2 provinces. I think that that's unfair, and it shows empirically that there is a severe lack of representation from Alberta and from the West. When you look at the Senate, something that I think needs to be reformed, the Senate is supposed to be a chamber for sober second thought, but it's also supposed to deal with representation issues. Well, even though Alberta has 11% of the population of Canada, guess how much representation we have in the Senate? About half that. about 5%. That is despicable. That needs to change. But unfortunately, it's constitutionally entrenched. The Constitution is fighting against Albertans who want to be represented. Now, I want to talk about a childhood incident of mine. It was back in 2000, and it's when I first started to...
2000? Give me a break.
It was 5 years ago. No. So I was watching TV with my family, and it was election night. And I was 5 years old in the year 2000. It was the year that Jean Chrétien received his second majority government. Now, nothing was announced yet, but the results were coming in, and from what I understood, it looked like the East was voting for Jean Chrétien. And, well, they were. And before the results even came in, my dad turned off the TV. And he said, well, it doesn't really matter what happens now. And I thought to myself, well, that's a little fishy, don't you think? And he said, well, really, the election, Keean, has already been determined. The East decides who elects our prime ministers, and it's reflected in who our prime ministers have been. He's right, and ever since then, I've been concerned about the state of Alberta and our lack of ability to be represented in this country. Now, I asked the question, how many of you speak French? And more we see that this government, not just this government being Trudeau, but the Canadian government, whoever the prime minister is, it's not really being run and operated by the elected officials. Your member of parliament really doesn't change that much in the inner workings of the government, I'm sorry to say. What happens, the people who change things are the bureaucrats, the people of parliament, the officers of parliament, from the Supreme Court to the Auditor General, the Chief Electoral Officer, the Official Languages Commissioner, Privacy, Information, Conflict of Interest, all of those people. Well, if you didn't put your hand up earlier today, earlier in this talk here, if you don't speak French, well, you are not able to actually fill any of those government positions at all because of Pierre Trudeau. You can't be the Official Languages Commissioner. You can't be the Ethics Commissioner. And actually, if you look at the Ethics Commissioner, all of the Ethics Commissioners that we've had, most of them, if not all of the data I've been able to find, they've all come from Quebec. They've either been educated in Montreal at McGill, or they've been educated at the University of Ottawa and were born in Montreal. I think that's despicable. I think if we had an Alberta Ethics Commissioner, maybe Trudeau would finally be held to account instead of Quebecers giving him $200 fines for breaking the law. I think that's a severe problem. I think the representation, the issue here is not just oil and gas, it's not just the carbon tax, it's structural lack of representation in this country, and it's something that needs to be fixed if we are to see ourselves in this country in a generation. If it's not fixed, well, something has to change.
Thank you for those opening remarks, Keean. I'll now call upon Sheila Gunn Reid for her 6-minute presentation. I see she's just scribbling down an extra note there. Take your time, Sheila.
No, it's okay.
Okay, come on up.
Unlike Keean, I'm not going to tell you any stories from my youth because I'm a lady, and once you get to a certain age, you don't want anybody to know how old you are. I'm going to tell you a few numbers today because I think a story is told in the numbers between two different cities. Texas right now, their economic growth is outpacing the rest of the United States by double. Overall, across Texas as a state, the unemployment rate is at 3.4%. 3.4, so constructive full employment is about 4, so they're actually overemployed. Texas last month created 30,100 jobs in the state. Houston, so let's compare Houston to Calgary, right? That sounds about right. That's the HQ of all the oil companies. Houston alone created 30% of those Texas jobs. Let's talk a little bit about Calgary now. Calgary, the downtown vacancy rates, I was just pulling them up on my phone while Keean was regaling us with tales of the mid-2000s. And Downtown vacancy rates, they're at about 23 to 25% in downtown Calgary. It peaked at about 30% in 2017. But some of those vacancy rates are being hidden in the fact that those office towers are being turned into housing. Because the businesses are never coming back. The head offices, they're gone. They're not coming back. Let's see. Texas, again, has experienced the 5th consecutive month, 5 consecutive months of record low unemployment. In Alberta, at the very same time, insolvencies are up by 70% since 2015. What happened to us in 2015? Notley and Trudeau. 89% of Alberta businesses say their economic situation has deteriorated, and I'm willing to guess the other 11% do business with the government. The Conference Board of Canada says that Edmonton and Calgary are going to see the lowest rates of economic growth out of the 13 major cities in the entire country. What's the unemployment rate in Edmonton and Calgary right now? 7.5%. So more than double what's happening in Texas right now. Well, and everybody else works for the government, right? In West Texas, so what would we call West Texas? What's the patch over to Alberta? Bonnyville, maybe? Cold Lake, maybe Fort McMurray. You know what their unemployment rate is? 2%. 2%. And you know what we get for that? When we can see what's happening in Alberta, this Saudi Arabia of the West, as far as oil and gas is concerned, we got a natural resources minister who was Trudeau's best man and who donated money to the World Wildlife Fund when Gerald Butts was in charge. That's the outreach we're getting when we are going broke, we are losing everything, and we can see how good it can be somewhere else if we just had a government who let us do what we do best. I'll close on one last thing. The jobs numbers for Alberta, or for all of Canada, they were out last week. When Alberta does poorly, Canada does poorly. But our powers that be care so little about what happens here that they don't really seem to care that hurting Alberta hurts everybody else. The country lost 1,800 jobs last month. And that, yeah, not at SNC. Move heaven and earth to save SNC, right? And our head offices are just deploying to the rest of the world along with money that goes to safer places in the world to do business like Iraq, where ISIS is, Saudi Arabia, Egypt. That's where our best and brightest are. You know what? I got a quick question. How many of you in here know somebody in the oil patch who's working in another country right now? Look at those hands. That's the real brain drain, isn't it? How do we recover from that? Once the money's gone, but once the people are gone. Ottawa is standing by and doing nothing while we're losing not only a generation of investment, but a generation of expertise. We're not going to have the people left to work our way out of this mess until we find a way to stop the bleeding, until we find a way to make Ottawa listen to us.
Thank you, Sheila. Now for his opening remarks, Lorne Gunter, senior columnist, Edmonton Sun.
When I walked in the lobby tonight, somebody said, "You're wearing jeans." I said, "Yeah." "Have you seen me on with Ezra on Rebel?" And I said, "Yeah." I said, "Lots of times I'm not wearing pants." So. I am not yet a separatist, but I'm getting closer just so that I don't have to listen to endless Maple Leafs coverage on TSN. I want to start off by talking about a guy named Mike Mansfield. Some of you may be old. I graduated from university 20 years before Keean had his traumatic childhood experience. When I was growing up in southern Alberta, I was born and raised in Medicine Hat, our American TV channels were from Great Falls, Montana. And so I didn't think anything of the fact that Mike Mansfield, who was a senator from Montana, was the most powerful person in the United States Senate. He was the longest serving leader, majority leader, in U.S. Senate history, 1961 to 1977. He was the most powerful person in the U.S. Senate. I think the speaker of, or the majority leader in the Senate is the fifth in line for the presidency. So it's a huge issue. And in those days, Senate seniority was ironclad. I mean, he had tremendous power. And he was from a state that had one member of the House of Representatives. But his state had exactly the same number of senators, 2, as New York, California, or any of the other very populous states. That's why their system is not as loaded. Their system's loaded towards California and New York and some of the other more populous states, no question about it. But it's not as loaded as ours. There isn't a way for the St. Lawrence Valley and the Great Lakes region, certainly the Lake Ontario area in Canada, to control things the way that it does. Today, as a contrast to Mike Mansfield from little old Montana being a powerful person in the U.S. government, 28 of 37 federal cabinet ministers sworn in today are from Ontario or Quebec. That's 76% of them. The two provinces together have 60% of the population. There are 7 cabinet ministers from Montreal and 6 from Toronto. It's the way the system works. So when I say I'm not a separatist, it's because I've lived in this country all my life. I've been a proud Canadian all of my life. If at some time we are forced to leave, I say that it's Canada who left us, not us who left Canada. But I do think there are ways, and Ezra and I talked about these last night at a similar event in Edmonton. There are ways that, I could be persuaded to give things a second thought. If we got Trans Mountain built, that would be great. But there's another resource project that I think we have to keep our eyes open for. It's called the Frontier Oil Sands Project. It's in value probably 2.5 times the size of Trans Mountain. It's a new oil sands mine north of Fort McMurray. The company that's in charge of it is Teck Resources out of Vancouver, and they have done everything possible. They have satisfied federal regulators. They have satisfied provincial regulators. They have signed 14 agreements with the First Nations and Métis communities that surround the project. And they have even worked out a way where they're going to reclaim land as they finish mining certain portions of their project, where the buffalo herd, the bison herd that is native to that area can still move around, have all the area that they need in order to survive. They've crossed all the T's, dotted all the I's. The only thing that's left is for the federal cabinet to decide whether or not they get approval. The public comments period ends on the 24th of this month, and then the federal cabinet has until February to decide on whether or not it's going to approve Frontier. Very good indication to me whether or not things really are different in Ottawa, whether they really mean it when they say they're going to conduct outreach. I don't hold out a lot of hope. I mean, I have fought, Ezra said, we've been doing this since Ted Byfield at Alberta Report, I was, and I'll confess to this, I was as a young person, a young liberal. And I remember my very first 1975. There is no one more zealous than a convert. (1975), so I was much older than 5 years old. At a conference, a convention, provincial convention for the Liberals in a room about 1/15 the size of this one, making a speech against Pierre Trudeau. It was not a popular speech, but I've been fighting this fight since I can remember, since 1975. I remember the wheat board fights. I remember the crow's nest fights. I remember all of the things that we have had to suffer in Western Canada and in Alberta in particular as a result. So I don't have a lot more patience. I do think we need to firewall whatever we can immediately because it will take some time to gain independence. And just as when you're pretty sure your marriage is coming to an end and you're trying to shelter your assets away from a post-nuptial agreement, we do need to be clever about all of this. So Trans Mountain, I mean, we of course all lived through the NEP, and not Keean. Sorry, not Keean. So I don't have a lot more patience, but it's not going to hurt too much to play this wisely, because as Ezra correctly said, when we get really serious about this and we start to figure out what the one objective is that we have, they're going to start coming for us. You remember 1995, the Quebec referendum, there was the Love-In. It was called the Unity Rally. That was the official name of it. I call it the Love-In, where Air Canada basically gave away tickets to anyone from the rest of the country who wanted to rush to Montreal and beg and plead while tears rolled down their faces for, please, Quebec, stay. Please don't leave us. That's not happening here. No, but it knows where the checks come from, or at least it's the source of the money. I think there's a difference in Alberta, and I think that once we decide, if we decide, and there is still an if we decide to go, this will not take as long as Quebec sovereignty. There will not be questions. You remember the 1995 Quebec referendum? Well, Keean doesn't, but the 1995 Quebec referendum question was, you know, if we can make an arrangement whereby we still keep the money, but we don't have to put up with all of their interference, would you be okay if we sort of have a sovereignty arrangement? That's basically what the question said. Ours will say, you want to go? But until that time, if that time comes, it may be when. It's good. You have to understand that there are a lot of things that have to happen. You know, somebody said to me, why don't you just hold a referendum now? Well, who's going to hold it? It has to have a legal framework around it. You have to have a motion in the legislature calling for a referendum. You want a referendum before there's a separatist party that's in power in the legislature, you have to put your pressure on your MLAs to have a referendum. Premier Kenney is going to have a referendum on equalization. Trust me, that is really just a surrogate for a referendum on whether or not, it is a test. You're going to vote for equalization, yes or no? Yeah, maybe. It could be too far away. Then you have to there has to be a legal framework for it. As much as all of this frustration is understandable and things are dire, there still has to be some kind of legal vessel around all of this. Remember this, all of the 13 colonies that voted to leave Britain and form the United States, all 13 of them sent delegates to 2 continental congresses where they debated what they would do. They came up with the Declaration of Independence. They unanimously approved it. They presented it to the British, and then when the British wouldn't accept it, they fought a revolution. These things do not happen instantly, despite how much frustration there is. So while we're waiting for that, we have to work on firewall activities. Thanks very much.
Thank you. You know, when you were talking, I looked up the wording for 2 different referendums. Let me start with the wording of the Brexit referendum, which couldn't be clearer. Here it is. Should the United Kingdom remain a member of the European Union or leave the European Union? Remain or leave? Pretty clear, wasn't it? Like, you really can't get confused about that. Now, I'm going to read to you the English translation of the Quebec referendum question from 1995. You made me curious, so I looked it up. Yeah. Get this. Do you agree that Quebec should become sovereign after having made a formal offer to Canada for a new economic and political partnership within the scope of the bill respecting the future of Quebec and of the agreement signed on June 12, 1995? I don't even know that. I forgot what was the first part again? Now, you notice it doesn't say country, doesn't? Sovereign, but political partnership, and it was so soft. I think that it was soft because I don't think they knew they didn't have the support for do you think Quebec should be an independent country? It didn't say that, because I don't think they quite have the support. But it goes to the question, what are you trying to do? And one of the things, and there's some good people here from various parts of the WEXIT community, ecosystem, if I was a lefty. There's a WEXIT ecosystem. Sometimes it's just what's a cooler hat, Republic of Alberta or, independence or whatever. But to be serious for a moment, there are different approaches. There are people who want to join the United States. I mean, Donald Trump had his eyes on Greenland, and it wasn't a joke. Truman tried to buy Greenland, too. There's less than 100,000 people there. It's just a big place. China was making a move. That's why Donald Trump spoke out. It's not so crazy. If Donald Trump has his eyes on Greenland, imagine what a single tweet from Donald Trump about Alberta would do. I think he would suddenly... I think Alberta's taken for granted within Confederation, and nothing would get the jealousy and the anti-Trump juices flowing in Justin Trudeau and the media party than have Trump say, well, hey, Alberta, what are you doing hanging out with him? Why don't you hang out with me? I'll treat you right. I don't know. But let me do what I said I was going to do earlier. But so my point there is, what is the plan? Because if there were a referendum today, would it say separate country? And would it be for Alberta or Alberta and Saskatchewan? Or Alberta, Saskatchewan, and Manitoba? Or how about all of BC? Or how about part of BC? I mean, if you go just across the border into places like Golden, and I mean, it really feels like Alberta until you're all the way down to Hope. Like, it feels like Alberta and Revelstoke. It feels like Alberta to me. And I think those people consider themselves more Albertan than Vancouverite. But the thing is, who's going to figure this out? But if there were a referendum, who would it be put to? Would it be put to the people of Alberta, and then others would be invited to join? These are practical questions, and they're not trick questions. They're questions that would immediately be asked by both people of good faith and people of bad faith. And the answers ought to be puzzled through, figured out in advance. Keean, who's a monarchist, and I respect that. Listen, you could be part of the Commonwealth. Last night we had an interesting talk from Barry Cooper, who said the British Empire was just replaced by the Laurentian Empire, and in fact, some prime ministers have called the West the colonies in the past. Isn't that interesting? Well, maybe we would still be, maybe we'd still have the Queen on our Alberta bucks and Alberta stamps. But these things have to be figured out. The Bloc Québécois was not a serious organization because it was in a federal parliament, and what could they really do other than to press for the advantage of the Parti Québécois provincially, which is where the referendums came from, the two referendums, the one in 95 and the one before that. I think those questions have to be answered. And when I say the Rebel ought to be a house of debate, that's one of the things that has to be figured out, and it has to be figured out by people who are allowed to speak without being condemned for trying to figure out a better way. No one is a Wexiteer because they're malicious or a destroyer. It's sort of the opposite. They want to get away from the destroyers. This is not a natural movement. It's a reaction to something that's being done to the West. In that way, it's different from Quebec. I haven't seen any hats tonight that say the West wants out. But, I was Preston Manning's assistant way back in the day, and I understand the West wants in was the counterpoint to the Western Canada concept movement of about 40 years ago. But I think you have to say it didn't work. In the very short term, it took 50, 60 seats away from out of contention, and it gave Jean Chrétien 3 straight majorities. So in the immediate term, it might have felt good to express ourselves, but it resulted in 3 Liberal back-to-back majorities. And in the longer term, what did it do? How are things structurally different now than they were in the first National Energy Program? And I think the West wants out is a way of saying, yeah, we already tried the West wants in. The best foot forward, reform. We tried to fix it from within. I was there with Preston. I was Keean's age. And, Preston went there with such good faith and such high hopes and good intentions. It didn't work. So I think those things have to be figured out. But let me, I have so many notes, but I want to limit myself, and then we're going to go back to Keean and do one more time. But let me, I've spent some time in the UK, mainly studying the case of Tommy Robinson. Does anyone here follow that case a little bit? I see it as a warning for Canada if we lose our freedom of speech, our ability to criticize. It's a warning about the politicization of police. It's a warning about deplatforming. I feel like it's, you've probably heard me say this, my own dystopian time machine. I go to the UK and I come back and I think, oh my God, I've seen a dark future if we don't change our path. That's how I feel. And I say that for matters of political correctness, but I also say that in how Brexit has gone. Because that crystal clear question that I read to you, it won. It won the largest vote count in any British vote in history, 17.4 million people. And it won against all odds. All the parties were against it. Now, you might be saying, well, hang on, the Conservatives called the vote. Well, they did it just because they thought it would lose, and to take the air out of the balloon, and to say, you see, it failed. They were, as soon as it passed, they hated it. They delayed it for 3 years. All the parties were against it. The vast majority of the media were against it, especially their state broadcaster, the BBC, which is enormous. All the big businesses were against it. All of academia was against it. All the experts, all the economists, all the banks. They had something called Project Fear. That's what they called it, where we're going to scare you so badly what will happen. We'll run out of medicine. They said that. I watched it on TV as the head of the British Sandwich Association. There's such a thing, obviously, lifetime member. The head of the British Sandwich Association literally looked into the camera and said, if Brexit goes through, we won't be able to have the delicious sandwiches the Brits have come to love because we won't be able to get the fresh ingredients. I swear to God he said this. That's when I ripped up my membership. So everyone was against it except the people. But when it passed, did they leave? They did not. It was delayed. In fact, they're still not out. All the games in Parliament and the delays, the lawsuits. And do you think it would be any different here? I don't think it would be any different. I think it would be worse. Because they would have learned from how to foil a referendum from the Brits. Here's one more thing to learn from the Brits, and then I'll wrap up and we'll go to Keean and we'll do our second round. I've got so many points here. I'm going to stop it at Brexit, and then I'll give my Quebec comments in my second round of speaking. The Brits weren't being asked to do anything too radical. They were being asked to go back to how they were just a few years ago. They weren't being asked to form their own country. They were just being asked to leave this sort of mini UN called the EU that had a lot of power actually over them. So it had some familiarity. They always kept the pound. Many other European countries gave up their currencies for the euro. So it wasn't that radical what they were trying to do. They had a hero, Nigel Farage, who had been in the trenches for so many years, people sort of became comfortable with him. He was a colorful character, but they came to trust him enough, as politicians go. And the party had been around for some time. But still, it took them years to do it, and they're not even out yet. I think we can see a lot of those things. You can expect that kind of pushback, the kind of demonization. They certainly demonized the UKIP party. That was Nigel Farage's party, the Leave party. They demonized them racially. They called them racist. They called them sexist. All the things they call Albertans. I am going to squeeze in one more comment about Quebec, because I did look at what Quebec has done. Now, Quebec has not successfully left, but what have they done that WEXIT has not yet done? For one thing, there are a lot of out-and-out Quebec separatists in every station of life. There's a spectrum of how separatist you are, but there's an enormous number of successful, popular people in high public esteem who are separatists. I used to work for one. I think Pierre Carpelado was sort of a separatist. What am I saying? He led the party. What am I saying? He led the Parti Québécois, the founder of Sun News Network, the owner of the big media companies, Journal de Montréal, Journal de Québec, TVA, the biggest broadcaster. He's a separatist. He actually was briefly the leader of the Parti Québécois. So many business people are. The cultural leaders. There's so many folk singers. Actors. Gilles Deseppe was the son of an actor, son of a movie usher, actually. The media, the CBC French, is infested, colonized with separatists. All the parties, to one degree or another, are separatist or separatist payer offers. Lawyers, judges, it was the whole province had a cause together. And I think it's necessary to have that spirit of a people if you're trying to create a nation. I'm going to guess that most people in this room are a little bit like me, which is you think with, is it your left part of your brain? So you're a little bit more maybe math, engineering, accountant kind of guy. Well, that's how some people think, but other people think more with their heart. People learn and come to their opinions differently. Where's the heart? Where's the dream? Quebec is full of people who would sing about what this new nation would be. They were building a feeling of a people. I think that a WEXIT movement without that part, without the pop culture part, I think country music is sort of an obvious fit there. But you also need academics. When I worked for Preston 20-odd years ago, I became friends with my counterpart at the Bloc Québécois, who worked for the leader of that party. We're still friends to this day. And he gave me once, I got to dig it up, an encyclopedia. It's about this many, it's about 7 volumes, I guess. It's about this thick. the official Quebec government's blueprint for separatism. It was different volumes, and it was scholarly bureaucratic studies in every possible question. What do we do with the debt? What do we do with the Canadian Forces bases? What do we do with embassies? What do we do with trade agreements? How do we handle monetary policy? All of the questions that could be a good faith or bad faith objection. Well, what are you going to do about that? How will you still have free trade with the United States? How are you going to get your pipeline out? Who's going to own Cold Lake? Who do the soldiers of the PPCLI, what will happen to them? These are all real questions, and you need some sort of answer. Even if it's not a great answer, you need to start asking the questions. Quebec, because it had the Parti Québécois provincially, it had access to the bureaucrats and the budget to put together a hell of a plan. Like it was this many volumes. And you're not going to get that coming out of this provincial government. You might get that from some sort of a think tank, but you need to do that kind of homework, I think, because it's not just the bad faith saboteurs who will ask you these questions. It's people who want to know, well, what are we doing? What's the plan? And that's what I say to my friends who are ready to roll, ready to go out the door. I put it to you, if you had a referendum today, I don't think it would pass. Because I think there would be a lot of objections, and Project Fear, which would come, would crack those open. Nigel Farage could answer most of Project Fear because we all knew what life was like before that. Let me close in the 15th minute of my 6-minute remarks. I'm not an expert in it at all, but I started reading about how Czechoslovakia became the Czech Republic and Slovakia. Now that's a quirky story. Do we have any Czechs or Slovaks here today? Okay, so you please correct me if I'm wrong here, because I'm going by about like an hour's research. But Czechoslovakia was around for decades. Of course, that was where. But after the fall of the Soviet bloc, the country came apart fairly quickly, didn't it? The Czech part was a little bit wealthier, not enormously wealthier, not like Alberta to Quebec, we're double the GDP per capita. We really are. It was like 20% higher. And the transfer payments were cut off, and there was sort of some grumbling and different parties on different sides, and it was sort of like a walk away. They called it the Velvet separation, like the Velvet Revolution. This was the Velvet separation. There was no fight. They passed declarations in their respective parliaments in July of 92. Am I right? And by January 1st of 93, they were gone. Am I right? What's that, 6 months? And the thing is, I don't think it was actually put to a national vote, was it? No. It was just the MPs, really. And then they negotiated hard bargaining in like a hotel or something. And it was done really from conception to effect was 2 years, and from the start epistle was 6 months. But that was both sides sort of wanted to be done to the other, and they were in a place where they could pass a law. Unless you had a provincial government that had the ability to get a clear question put, I think it would take years. It's just something to think about. And by the way, population-wise, there's about 10 million Czechs and about 5 million Slovaks. So, I mean, that's not equal, but it's equal enough compared to, 11, 12% of the population versus 90% of the population. Something to think about. I think it's important to study how this movement happens elsewhere to see if there's something that can be applicable, to see if you can avoid certain mistakes or learn from certain ways. Quebec has shown us certain things that have worked. They've built proto-institutions that could turn into national institutions. If that's one of the reasons they have their Quebec pension plan, not the Canada pension plan, their Quebec immigration program, their Quebec police force, not the RCMP. It's not just that they want those things now. They want the germ of a national police force. They want the germ of a national pension plan And why not start now? All right. Let me give you a break and call up my friend Keean for his second comments.
Is this working? Can people hear me from here? Okay. Well, I think we could pull that out. All right. You can still hear me? So, I like to take these jokes about my age in stride. But I'll have you know I'm 8 Brexits old. That's how old I am, if you were to measure me in Brexits. And to what you were saying about Texas, Sheila, Texas is growing, it's booming, and you said that employment is at about 2%. And really, that's about as low as unemployment actually can get, because there's people that go between jobs. Doesn't get much better than that. So I also like to look at, I love Chick-fil-A. I love Chick-fil-A. It is my favorite restaurant. In fact, when I go to Toronto, to the head office, I bring Chick-fil-A back to the office for everyone because I just love it so much. But, you know, it's been growing and growing and growing in Texas. In fact, the Texas growth of Chick-fil-A has led the country and has now become the 3rd largest fast food chain in the United States of America. Right now, at the Harper International Airport, actually back in 2012, that's the YYC, there was a Chick-fil-A. They had a Chick-fil-A there because all of the folks from Houston who would come up to Calgary to deal in the oil field, well, they wanted their Chick-fil-A. So they went to the airport and they'd get it there on their way back to Houston or on their way to Calgary. That one closed down. 100% of the Chick-fil-A's in Canada closed down in the time Justin Trudeau had his first term. I think that was pretty sad, and I think that's a good metric to show how far Alberta has come down, because really all those people coming up from Houston, they're not coming anymore. That's why it closed down, because nobody is coming from the United States to deal in our oil patch. Now, by a show of hands, I want to ask some more questions. How many people in this room are a member of the United Conservative Party? It's about 50%, would you say? More than that. Well, right now, at the United Conservative Party is going to have their first annual general meeting in a while. It's going to be on the 30th of November, the last weekend of November. And I have it on good authority that while there is no separatist motion of the sort on the agenda, they will be taking motions from the floor. Now, I'm not a member of the United Conservative Party, so I could not do something like that. But if someone was to do that, I would commend you. So just keep an eye out for that. Now, I also want to talk about what needs to be done. If we are to separate, where do we go? How do we do it? Well, there's a long list of things that need to be done. Well, we need to sort out embassies. We need to establish a military. We need to establish a police force. We need to pull all of our investments from the CPP out of the CPP. It's something like $6 billion that we could bring back to Alberta and put in AIMCO. We need to do a lot of things, and starting with that firewall letter, as Lorne mentioned, is, I think, the preliminary work, and it's what the Kennedy government is doing, so that's good. I appreciate it, but it's going to be really, really hard. So if we were to put this motion forward to the United Conservative Party or whatever party you are a member of, well, I think that it needs to start with something like getting a government panel, as much as I dislike the government, getting a government panel together to start looking at this from an academic perspective, from a bureaucratic perspective, like Ezra was mentioning. There's a lot of options when it comes to a military. Well, it's kind of hard, and it kind of makes me wish that the corrupt PC government didn't burn through our heritage fund, because that sure would have been a nice down payment on a few jets and a few tanks. In fact, the British actually train a lot at Suffield, and there's a lot of equipment that they have there, and it sure would be nice to just give a call to Boris Johnson and say, well, hey, we need a military, you have some equipment here, why don't we just give you some cash for it? That would be nice. And those are the kind of questions and the practical answers, that the practical problems that we need to deal with. So I think that some motion to the United Conservative Party, or whatever party you associate with, should deal in somewhat that question. Now, while I do think that it will be very hard to do this, I don't think that it is impossible. Albertans are a tough people. We're an ingenious people. Hell, we figured out how to pull rock-hard bitumen out of sand that are hundreds of meters in the ground. That is phenomenal. We actually, you might not know this, an Albertan by the name of Jacqueline Shen invented cold FX. When it comes to drugs, running out of drugs in the United Kingdom, well, Albertans got that covered. Another invention that Canada likes to take credit for is the Canadarm. That's kind of Canada's claim to fame when it comes to space. Canadians and the Quebec aerospace industry likes to say that, well, Canada, they invented the Canadarm. That's not actually entirely true. Alberta created some very integral parts to the Canadarm. It's called the Advanced Space Vision System. When you're in space on the International Space Station, there's a lot of problems when you're dealing with depth of field, when you're looking at trying to grab a moving space shuttle out of space and pulling it towards the International Space Station. There's blinding sunlight that causes you to not be able to see. If a human looked at the sun through the space station, it could blind them. But an Albertan rather, actually invented that vision system so that there could be two cameras using 2D sensing so that they could create a 3D image to figure out exactly where the space shuttle was relative to the ISS. That is ingenious. My point is, Albertans could do this if we want to. And I think Canadians should take us very, very seriously when we say, if you cross us any more than you already have, we're out.
Sheila, you can do it from there or from the podium?
No, I'm good from here, I think. So what is it going to take for you folks to want to stay in the country? Is it getting rid of the tanker ban? And, yeah? Would that do it for you? No? I didn't think so. I didn't say. What about getting rid of the no pipelines bill? Okay, not enough? What about building TMX with your own money after they chased a private company out of the country? Keep going. Not enough? What if they stopped their attempts to impose a carbon tax on us? No. You know, there are some people, like Ezra said last night, that might be enough to make him change his mind. And I don't think it is. I don't think it is enough because all of those things they stem from something, don't they? They stem, I think, from the fact that there is serious structural inequity in the government that creates conditions so that a central government made up of our Laurentian elites and our moral and intellectual superiors to do these things to us. Last night I pulled some numbers because, like Keean, I had not prepared, so I'm recycling yesterday's notes. The Senate. How many senators does Alberta have? 6, exactly. How many does PEI have? 4. Alberta has 1 senator for every 715,000 people. PEI has 1 for every 38,000 people. PEI is roughly the population of Red Deer and Blackfalds. And they have 4 senators and we have 6. And our senators, we've been trying to elect them, right? We've been doing our best to elect them. We had a senator who needed to be appointed very recently. We have a senator in waiting still. Why? Because Justin Trudeau ignored the will of Albertans and did not appoint our democratically elected Senator Mike Shake. Instead, he appointed a mainstream media journalist named Paula Simons. That's the problem. We are trying already. We've been trying to make these little steps. We are engaging in a legal challenge to try to keep the carbon tax away from us. But the federal government is fighting us every single step of the way. Why don't we talk about the MPs? In Alberta, we have 33 Conservative MPs and 1 that is holed up in Edmonton for the NDP. 33 MPs, every single one of them conservative, and we elected them with an even greater mandate than they had before. We turned up and we said, we are going to vote even more for conservatives, as though it even matters anymore. There are 25 MPs in Toronto and another 18 in Montreal. There's our 33 MPs, canceled out before we even finish at the ballot box. That's a problem. That's a problem that until it's fixed, none of this matters, because we'll be back here in 30 years. The way we're always back here in 30 years, talking about leaving, until those structural problems get fixed. Right now, 80% of Albertans say that their country is deeply divided. 80%. I think it's probably 100% in the room, minus the 3 from the CBC. But it's not just us. Saskatchewan says 77%. And across the rest of the country, it's 60%. It's a deeply divided country. We have our own issues here, but don't think that this isn't affecting or resonating with the rest of the country. There, like Ezra said, there are people who are going to come out and try to fight us if we do try to go. But I think there's a lot of people who are saying, we get it, and we understand. And for that reason, I still have hope. I have hope that someone can convince me that there's a reason to stay other than nostalgia, but I haven't heard it yet.
I'm going to stand because my joints are old enough that if I don't get up and stretch every once in a while, I'll never get up again. It would be really easy, I think we've seen that already, to get the people in this room to agree it's time to go. And we've talked about how the rest of the country might react. I mean, we're going to get no credit at all for the $600 billion we've given to Confederation since 1960, more than we've received back in benefits. If people are going to try and hang that over our heads, I'm prepared to live with the guilt. But it's going to be, and I think Ezra touched on this, it's going to be a case of convincing other Albertans who are not as passionate about this right now as we are. And we have to be respectful of the fact that there are other people who live in this province who love it just as much as we do, who may not yet be convinced. And I think that's why the project that Ezra's talking about would be very important, and that is to get intellectuals, experts together and get them working on answers to the questions that passionate Albertans are going to ask because they're afraid that the change might be worse than what they've already got. It's not hard to convince them that things are tough, but it might be harder to convince them that things will get better if we change. You know how it is when people get scared that things are bad. They're not always prepared to take chances that something different will be better. And so that's why it's very important. You have to remember, too, for instance, that the figure of $600 billion that Alberta's contributed since the 1960s was originally calculated by a guy named Bob Mansell. Bob Mansell is an economist at the U of C who is very honest and straightforward and not politicized in his thinking. He wanted to see what it was, what the numbers actually were. He sat down, he did all the calculations. And since that time, and I first encountered him in the early 1990s, since that time, people have added to the work that Bob did. But Bob was responsible. You can't be afraid that every expert or every academic is going to be against Alberta independence. You'll be surprised by the people you will think would be in favor of independence who aren't. And you'll be surprised, in many cases, pleasantly surprised, by the people who you would imagine aren't in favor of independence, who end up being quite in favor of it. And people will change. But I think Ezra's right, that if you just went out today and asked without any preparation, without any lengthy arguments and background on whether we should go or not. There are just a lot of people who haven't thought about it as much as the people in this room. I mean, Ezra likes to use the term severely normal Albertans, and this is a room full of severely normal Albertans. But we're not all representative of all Albertans. And so there have to be passionate cases made. A couple of other things that I've been thinking about before we began tonight. I had a very enjoyable conversation with a guy who came up and identified himself as a yellow jacket, part of the yellow jacket movement. If you want an indication of just how difficult it's going to be to convince people in the establishment in the Golden Triangle, Montreal, Ottawa, Toronto, how difficult it is to convince them that we have a real grievance, consider the guy named Michael Wernick. Michael Wernick was the clerk of the Privy Council who delivered the message to Jody Wilson-Raybould that the Prime Minister was unhappy. She needed to throw a deal SNC-Lavalin's way. Did you notice that the same amount of effort when Encana announced that it was going, all that effort that the Liberals made to keep Encana in Calgary? Anyway, Wernick, he gave this bizarre testimony one time that I didn't fully understand. When he was first called before the Commons Justice Committee and asked about the SNC-Lavalin, he went on this long thing about the hate in the country and how there was this threat from people who hate that was going to break up the country. And I thought, this is bizarre. I don't get half as much angry Twitter feed or email or whatever as Ezra does, but I get a ton of it every day. I mean, I get the most hateful stuff you can imagine. Yeah, so what? Are you new to Twitter, Mike? I mean, is that why you didn't know people said these things? I didn't understand it. And then there was a access to information request that was released about 10 days ago where the Privy Council office actually worried that the Yellow Jackets were coming to Ottawa to kidnap Justin Trudeau. Why that? I know.
6 months
I know.
ago, and then they re-released it.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But why the hell would they want to? Who would want to have him as a hostage? Oh my God. Okay, let's release him. The whining's driving me nuts. But that's, the very idea that a bunch of people who are frustrated because their jobs and their businesses and their livelihoods and their families and their homes and their vehicles were being taken away from them by federal policies, were actually going to come and try and shoot people in Ottawa is just bizarre. I mean, they don't understand who you are if they think that's what you're about to do. And one thing that I want to close with is another reason why I'm not sure, I don't hold out a lot of hope. I'm still a little hopeful. I don't hold a lot of hope, though. Our problems economically in Alberta are not with geology. They're with politics. We know where the oil is. We know how to get it the hell out of the ground. We could transport it to any market. We have the smartest people in the world in resource extraction in this province. And yet, I mean, there's a lot of Albertans who don't understand what goes into, all that goes into getting oil or oil sands out of the ground, refined, down the pipe. I mean, it's a very complicated, very, very complicated, absolutely. It's a very complicated industry. But I want to leave with this one thing. There is a well, and my wife is a lawyer and she has lots of partners who are resource lawyers. There's a well apparently near Crossfield that is the most complicated property agreement in the Commonwealth. There are so many layers and so many owners and so many people with rights, and rights that go back to before the Statute of Westminster, and it took teams of lawyers months to figure out how to draw up the deal for this one well. That is not the indication of dumb people. We are not people who are unenlightened. We don't need somebody from Ottawa, and this is going to come. They're going to tell us, as Ezra has said, again and again and again, if only you understood, if only you knew how much the climate is threatened, you would think as we do. And as much as it's easy to be frustrated, we do also have to understand that it's a process. And we have to get started on the process. And I think this is a very good way to start, because even the disagreement in the room has been done very politely, very respectfully.
It's about a week to the UCP convention, am I right? We're going to have the rebels there, Sheila and Keean. I'll be there too. Jason Kenney, for some weird reason, put us in the fridge for 2 years, didn't he? Didn't even talk to us. We all were up in an event in Edmonton. He came over, shook our hands twice. I don't understand. I'm glad the young lads saw the light. So we'll be there at the convention. Of course we are. I don't trust the media party to tell the truth about things. I mean, the mania over the last 24 hours about the defenestration. How do you like that word?
I love that word.
That means thrown out the window. The defenestration of Lorne Gibson, the hand-picked elections commissioner by Rachel Notley. It's as if he was some saint, some guardian of democracy, because if all you ever heard was what the media party told you about Lorne Gibson, that's what you'd think. But I think you in the room know what he was really like. That he investigated Keean first, actually, for Keean's billboards.
The fire egg and billboard.
Yeah, it's a great billboard. If you ever seen it, anybody see that billboard on Highway 2 there? It's a pretty great billboard.
He was fired. It worked.
Yeah, it was worked. He was fired, wasn't he? And then Sheila's best-selling book, Stop Notley. The law specifically exempts books from election finance laws. This is right there. And for 6 months, he hired private investigators at your expense to go after Sheila. And Sheila started to record the phone calls of these private investigators, ex-cops who were hired by Lorne Gibson to hound her. And one of them said, well, do you want to finish the story?
Yeah. Oh, is this on? Can you hear me? Okay, perfect. So one of them called me up. He actually called me a few times, emailed me a few times, but I don't have to speak to an investigator about a book in a free country. We didn't lose the Cold War, did we? So this one investigator called me up, a former city cop named Ken Brander. Google that name. He called me up and he said, you know, come on down, we'll sit down, we'll have a little talk about your book. They wanted my emails, they wanted my planning notes, my editorial notes about my book. They never let me see the complaints against me. They actually never even clarified the complaint against me. And he said, if I did not comply, although he said it in a very nice way because I was nice and he thought maybe he could convince me because I'm just a silly little lady. But he said to me that I would face escalating fines, serious consequences.
That was his name, serious consequences.
Serious consequences if I did not turn over my documents regarding the planning of my book. That is Lorne Gibson. That's who Lorne Gibson is. He is not some saint, some defender of democratic institutions, as Notley called him. He's out of control, partisan, and with absolutely no oversight.
Yeah. The reason I brought that up is because it's a good story.
Yeah.
Because we held the line.
Yep.
We spent over 30 grand fighting him with lawyers, and he finally just dropped the case. And by the way, if you go to
75.
Is that how much it was in there?
75,000.
If you go to SaveSheila.com, you can read the disgraceful letter that Lorne Gibson sent to Sheila just a month or two ago, where he said, and I'm going from memory here, he said, you should consider yourself lucky, fortunate that I can only prosecute the law as it is written. He put that in writing. He put that in writing.
And sent it to the lawyer.
I mean, normally you just think those things in your quiet voice in your head. You don't say that out loud.
Yeah.
If you're, don't tell me he's the same. And the reason, so it's a hell of a story. And fighting for free speech is something we do a lot at the Rebel because we're targeted, because we're dissenters. And my point is, we're going to be at the UCP. I took a real tangent there, didn't I?
Long way.
Because I simply don't believe a word the mainstream media says. I just don't believe a word of it. Because I think Lorne's got the exact wording on it. Yeah, if I relied on the media party to know what I know about Lorne Gibson, I too would think he was a saint and Jason Kenney was dead wrong. So I trust my own eyes. That's one of the reasons I do this crazy trip to the UK to see what's going on with Tommy Robinson. I don't believe a word of the reporters there. I believe what Keean says, and I believe what Sheila says, and what I like about our business at the Rebel is you don't even have to believe us because we show you with the video. You know, as the kids say, pics or it didn't happen. Our view is show the video, and we show the access to information documents. And that comment that Lorne had about how Trudeau's government thought that the United We Roll convoy was going to kidnap, not kill, just kidnap him. Kidnap Trudeau. It was Sheila that broke that news with an access to information document.
Yep.
And that's why they hate us, because we're not one of the think-alikes. Anyway, we're going to be there at the UCP convention. Thank you for that 10-minute digression. I apologize. Let's get back on track here, Ezra. Jason Kenney has been crystal clear with what he intends to do. He intends to pursue a version of what I think can be called the Alberta agenda or the firewall. And it's not a new idea. Stephen Harper and others signed a letter to this effect about 20 years ago. And another way of saying it is do what Quebec does within the existing constitution. You don't have to be part of the CPP. You don't have to have the RCMP be your police force. There's a lot of things you can do within the Constitution right now that we were just giving away for free to Ottawa. And, you know, having a referendum on equalization, and there's a lot of things, but Sheila made a list. Would it be enough for you if the Trans Mountain was built? Would it be enough? Would it be enough? And there were some people who said, well, I'd feel better about that. I don't know if it would be enough. I can assure you, having a provincial police force, having your own Alberta pension plan, and having an Alberta, immigration policy, or whatever, that ain't going to fix the structural problems, the systemic problems. So the most that Jason Kenney is asking for will not fix the system problem. And that's the most he's asking for if he gets them. The cleverness in that Quebec referendum wording was it was so vague and mysterious that it implied, well, we can get more things and there might be little bonuses and we'll give you a guaranteed 3 out of the 9 seats on the Supreme Court. Quebec gets 3 out of 9 seats on the Supreme Court. They don't even have 25% of the population. Now they're demanding that all judges, including from the West, be natively bilingual. Where did that come from? So these are all the gray areas that are thrown to Quebec to satisfy the demand. What Jason Kenney is asking for, I can assure you he will not get. The question is, do I trust Jason Kenney? I've known Jason for a long time, and I think that he is absolutely the best man to be the Premier of Alberta. Absolutely. But I also know that he would never, ever contemplate or countenance a separatist movement. Not only because it's not his style, it's not in his DNA, but I don't think I'm telling secrets when I detect that there's some ambition in the lad, and he may one day seek to be the Prime Minister of this country. His French is good. He's a nationwide name. He has friendships in new Canadian communities from coast to coast. He was the guy they brought in to do the heavy campaigning for Andrew Scheer in the final weeks. Jason Kenney has a job right now, but he may seek a different job in 4 or 8 years. And if he even breathed a word about independence, it would cut off that ambition at the knees. And so I say, even if you, and that's the problem, because right now, there's a thing in negotiating, and I really recommend the book Art of the Deal by Donald Trump. And you know why I recommend that book? First of all, it's a great read. It's very funny. It's like he's right there. Obviously, he had someone help him write it, but it's very Trump. And he talks about, the purpose of hyperbole and how to deal with the media. And I feel like I'm reading the Rosetta Stone to understand everything he's doing today. I recommend that book. And how do you negotiate? Well, there has to be an or else. There has to be or I'll walk away from the table. There has to be. I mean, whatever else you think about Trump, and you may not like him, but the guy knows how to negotiate. I mean, he certainly took Chrystia Freeland and Justin Trudeau for everything they were worth in the NAFTA negotiations. And I tell you one thing, how does he negotiate? Well, ask the Chinese how he's negotiating. Holy moly. My point is, if you don't have an or else, if you don't have an ability to walk away from the negotiating table, you are actually not negotiating. You may be negotiating with yourself, you may be trying to placate your base at home, but you ain't negotiating. Even against someone as bad at negotiating as Justin Trudeau, who starts his conversations with Bombardier with, is $1 billion okay? So I think that you need an or else. And when I said that all the parties in Quebec are separatist in a way, I mean that. I'm not being tricky, because they use the threat of separatism to extract more things. Even if they, in fact, I put it to you that Quebecers don't actually want to separate. They love the endless back and forth of it all, the endless negotiation. And if you don't, and at the very least, if Alberta had, well, if you don't give us the Trans Mountain, scrap the carbon tax, change equalization, fix the Senate, then we're out. If you don't have the if-then, you ain't going to get anything before in the first part of that sentence. I just think that's how it goes. Now let me close. I was brainstorming. I was brainstorming. Because there's some folks who came up to me, Ezra, we're ready to go. So a fellow here introduced himself, a very friendly guy. He said, I'm the WEXIT candidate, ready to rumble. Okay, you are, sir. And they're good hearts. But I think there's a few parts of the intellectual infrastructure that need to be built first. And I don't mean fancy pants. I mean answering questions. I jotted a few things down. I think there should be a quarterly journal. Not a weekly thing or a monthly thing, but a quarterly journal where thoughtful people say, well, here's my case for being a constitutional monarchy. Here's my case for joining America. Here's just a thoughtful thing, not rushed, not a daily newspaper, but something that once a month you have maybe a 5-page essay or a 10-page essay. You read it slowly and you think, oh, that guy did his homework. I saw something like that the other day by Gerard Lucician in the Frontier Center. He said, well, what could different borders look like? Could we have access to the sea? Well, that's a very interesting piece. And I think you have a quarterly journal. You have 10 interesting pieces a quarter. Some are by professors, some are by diplomats, some are by retired politicians. And it's not just a rant. It's, well, let's try and figure this out, or let me make the case for why we should have a provincial party, or here's a federal party. Let's work these things out. The federal space. That's a good idea. So I think a quarterly journal, or several competing quarterly journals. I think it's necessary to have a think tank dedicated to it. Last night someone said he was going to offer the Fraser Institute a certain sum of money to study these things. Okay, that's interesting, and I love the Fraser Institute, but any institute that has other goals or other patrons will probably reach a point where someone says, if you keep doing this, we're going to cut you off, or this is outside your mandate. You probably need something that's independent of that kind of political pressure. You need a think tank. There used to be something called the Canada West Foundation. I know it's still around. I don't know its nature these days. It was built back in the day to help push out studies of this sort. Yeah, well, yeah. I think that Quebec encyclopedia I mentioned, I don't think the whole thing needs to be translated. We don't need to know all the details of how Quebec would have done it, but I think certain parts of it, the table of contents, maybe what did they study? Should we replicate those issues? And maybe they actually thought through some things that could be immediately applicable. I guess what I'm saying is if Quebec spent $20 million or whatever they spent on this encyclopedia, that's what I'm calling it. I don't think they called it that. How about, you're going to hand me the 1 minute mark? How about, and I'm thinking of Keean now, how about 4-H, Rotary, young people, essay contests, debate contests with
Let's
prizes.
do it. I think that we could do it.
We could do it.
Why don't we
There you
do
go.
it?
Like $500 prize for the best essay on, so you're percolating the ideas down, you're getting other people to talk about it. I think there should be a daily website aggregator, like the Drudge Report. Here's all the stories on the subject. Just an aggregator, not necessarily publishing things, but here's the 10 links out there that you need to read about this subject, and we're going to have the pro and the con and everything. It's just your daily quick read. I think there should also be, and maybe my friend Matthew Johnston's here tonight, and I hadn't seen him in a while, but he was the co-founder of the Western Standard with me way back in the day, and that's revived. And Derek Fildebrandt's involved with it too, and I think the timing couldn't be better. It's it's westernstandardonline.com. Am I right, Matthew? And so I think that could be a vessel for that. And I think, and then the last one's sort of funny, but why not have some influencers? I've just discovered this new app called TikTok because my kids are on it.
Oh, God.
I think Will Smith, the actor, and Howie Mandel, the personality, I'm pretty sure they're paid to be on there, to be a little celebrity-ish. I don't know if we need paid influencers, but what Will Smith and Howie Mandel have done for TikTok is they sort of, this isn't just a nothing, this is some cool people are on it. And whether it's Brett Wilson, who's a bit of a businessman, entrepreneur, TV rock star, or a musician, there needs to be someone who defends the social acceptability of this, because otherwise you will be dealt with the same way the yellow vests have been demonized and slandered. So you need people who are big enough to resist the demonization that will come. It is now time to open up the questions. And I would like to invite you to not do what I'm doing, and to be brief. Now, who's gonna have the mic? Sheila, you're gonna have the mic?
Yeah.
All right. So don't give up the mic. Don't hand over the mic, Sheila, because that's the first step in losing control.
Hey.
Hi, my name is Al. Great job. Love the Rebel.
Thank you.
How do we keep the momentum going? I mean, you already mentioned a little bit about, opening up social media to acceptability and such, but how do we keep the momentum going?
Lorne, I got a view. Lorne, do you want to jump in?
Memes. Back in, and maybe I'm too young for this crowd here, but back in 2016 when Donald Trump was elected, you know what got him there? It was memes. It really was. And I'm thinking about the meme right now. Picture it in my head. It's the "all right, I'm a head out" meme. It's yeah, you got it. It's SpongeBob getting out of a chair. It's little infographic things, pictures with text that are easily shareable, that share an idea, a thought, and it's kind of funny sometimes. And that's really what political movements are turning into these days. It's easy to share. Even folks like Ezra know how to do it.
That's Mr. Ezra, you Sonny.
So that would be my suggestion. What do you think, Lorne?
I don't have much to add to that. It's going to be very important just within Alberta to be respectful when doing whatever it is. That really appeals, I think, to us as Albertans and to Albertans who are not here yet mentally in this room. And humor goes much further than outrage. And that's one of the reasons why memes are so effective, because if you can skewer, you used to call him the shiny pony all the time. our Prime Minister, Ezra used to call him Shiny Pony. That is far more devastating than that moron. I mean, if you can come up with something that's clever, and do whatever you can.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Little
do
potato.
whatever you can within your own sphere. Don't hesitate to talk to your friends. That by itself may be enough. That may be the contribution that you get to make. Keep going to meetings. You want to explore what WEXIT, the official movement, is doing. Go to a WEXIT rally and find out. Ask questions. And don't hesitate. I had an uncle, Uncle George, who was all his life a farmer. He was a dryland farmer in southwestern Saskatchewan, and it was as hard a life as you can imagine in agriculture. But whenever he had a question, he said, those people in the agriculture faculty at the University of Saskatchewan are there because of my tax dollars, and so I'm going to write to them and ask them for advice. Don't hesitate to ask experts. Don't be intimidated. You have a right to ask questions. Just be polite, and wherever possible, as respectful as you can be.
Sheila, I'll take your advice on when to go with the buckets, but so you let me know when that moment
Yeah.
is by your suggestion. Let's take some more questions.
Sure.
Hi there, I'm Stephen. Thank you very much. It's a great event tonight. I get the distinct sense in the room that everybody here would like to see the firewall issues accelerated, like put very quickly on the agenda. And I think we already determined there's a lot of UCP members in the room, but I think we also acknowledge that the UCP party is not moving forward as quickly as we maybe think they need to on the firewall. So I just put it out there that if anybody's at the UCP convention and puts it out on the floor, as Keean suggested, that how do we get them to expedite that, put a light of fire under their butt?
Well, I think the obvious opportunity is in just over a week's time to express those things as a loyal party member at the convention. And I should tell you that I mean, it's a tricky position because if you express anything more than Alberta agenda, you will be marginalized and pushed out. I think that will happen. I mean, at the end of the day, the UCP will be and is a federalist party. I think you can certainly push for faster for the Alberta agenda stuff, but Jason Kenney's success will take some of the air out of the balloon. So I think he wants to be successful. But I don't think that his remedies will fix the underlying problem. And the other gent said, how can we keep momentum going? Well, I think Justin Trudeau's going to take care of that. Go ahead, Sheila.
My name's Murray. A great event, Ezra. I just, as a member of WEXIT and the WEXIT movement, I went to the rally on Saturday night in North Calgary. And I just want to, I saw the gentleman here tonight. He's a military guy, and he gave a speech. He was in the military for 26 years, and I thought he gave a great speech about power versus wealth. So I just implore you to maybe share some of that tonight. But the point I wanted to make was the WEXIT movement, and what appeals to me is that it's not just Alberta separation, it's Western separation, and I feel very, very confident that if Alberta led, Saskatchewan would be with us in 5 minutes. And I just feel like those are my brothers over there in Saskatchewan, and if Saskatchewan and Alberta together were approached Manitoba, I don't think it would take them long either. Now you have a port, an existing deep water port in Churchill, Manitoba for exports, where we've been exporting wheat for decades, and we now have a prairie province with tide water to export not only oil but potash and wheat and other things, and I think we overlooked that. Thank you.
I'm just going to briefly say, I agree with that. I think that would happen, especially Saskatchewan, and I think the interior BC as well would start agitating to join up. But at another conference on Western independence last week in February, or in Red Deer, Leon Craig, who was my favorite professor when I was at university, And we still use those chalkboards to write our notes. And
What are those?
Yeah, exactly. And he was my favorite professor, despite the fact that he gave me the lowest mark I ever received at any level in school. That showed you how smart he was. Leon said, and I think he's quite right, we need initially to focus on our own house. We do Alberta. If other people want to join us, that's great. I think they will. He thought they would too. But we have a functioning set of borders. We have a functioning government. We have a legislature that covers all of that. And it just is natural that we start with Alberta and welcome anyone else who wants to join us after that.
I got to hold on to the mic.
My question or my observation is, when I was in high school, in debate club, we were always told the best way to defeat your opponent is to figure out where he's coming from and beat him to the punch with what he's trying to argue. So one thing that has not been mentioned tonight that I was been talking about with some friends of mine and coworkers, if Alberta or Saskatchewan or whoever decides to leave Canada, you know that the federal government's going to come after us with with every minute little point in the Constitution or whatever, anything they can to throw up a roadblock to keep us from separating. So would they have any constitutional leg to stand on to make us take a chunk of the massive debt that Canada has?
Well, that's a great question that Quebec has treated, and that I think is a live question. I think one of the benefits of coming after Quebec's wave of separatism is we have the Clarity Act, we have the Supreme Court ruling on separatism, so there's some sort of a roadmap. There's a lot of non-answers, like what exactly is a clear question? What exactly is a clear majority? I think what you're talking about, the debt there, that just comes down to how you negotiate at the end of the day. And do you have people with ice in their veins who are dedicated to doing this? At the end of the day, that debt is not going to stop an independence movement. It's just not going to. I think it could be a bargaining chip for rights back and forth. And by the way, a separate Alberta would have quite a lot of things it could negotiate, including flyover, trains, and Trans-Canada Highway. Like, there's a lot of negotiating both ways. I think it could be done in a friendly way. In other words, I don't think it's a constitutional barrier at all. I think that's a point of debate and negotiation. And I really got to dig up this Quebec encyclopedia and see what they said about it, because they were such net recipients historically. Yeah. It could certainly be argued that Alberta is a net giver historically. Last point, Brexit. The Remainers kept saying, oh, you have to pay tens of billions of pounds to get out. They were trying to put these fake obstacles there. And Nigel Farage said, no, clean break Brexit. We don't have to pay him a dime.
I think
Go
Lorne.
ahead.
No, I just, quickly, there isn't really a constitutional requirement for us to take any debt, as near as I can tell. But that won't stop people from suggesting that there is. And the one thing that I think did Andrew Scheer in the federal election more than anything else was his inability to anticipate obvious questions and have prepared answers for them when they were asked. And it would be the same thing if there was an independence movement in Alberta. Get ready for the most ridiculous things you can expect from Ottawa, because they will throw them at you, and know when they're coming. Back in the early 80s, Peter Lougheed, who eventually, there's an awful photograph of him tinking champagne glasses over the national energy policy. He did not have his or else side to his negotiations on the national energy program. But back then, he had deputy ministers and ministers who met on a regular basis, usually twice a week at Government House in Edmonton, to try and game what Ottawa was going to do in negotiations over the NEP. And for a long time, they were really, really good at figuring out what Ottawa was going to demand and being ready for it. And that, more than anything about the Constitution, is what we got to get ready to do.
I think maybe we should do this.
My friends, I learned one thing from Preston Manning. Actually, I learned more than one. It hit me. Sheila, it just, something you said made me, a lot of Preston memories come flooding back to me. I'm talking memories like...
Maybe it's my voice. It's sort of like Preston's, a little high, nasally.
Now, you know what? It just came back to me. I haven't thought of this in 20 years. But he used this phrase in a speech once. He said, we've been knocking on the door of Confederation so long our knuckles are bloody. Did anyone else hear him say that in a speech? And he used another one, and it stuck with me. He said, we've been bending over backwards till our spine shatters. Did anybody else remember him say that? I probably heard him give those speeches 100 times. But if he said that in the 90s, and here we are, and it's almost the 2020s. So how much longer? How much longer? One thing Preston taught me is you can't save the world if you can't pay the rent. And you have paid a ticket price here tonight, and I thank you for that. And I know there's some folks here who haven't had a lot of work lately, and so I'm grateful that you're here at all. But if there are some people who want to support the Rebel and projects like tonight's, we need your help. We don't take a dime from any government. Not a dime, of course not. So we rely on your help. And so my friend Sheila and Holly, who has been great helping us today and yesterday, Holly's here too. And I think that Jaden is here. Jaden, thank you very much for helping. We got the bucket brigade. That's how Preston did it. The old Kentucky Fried Chicken buckets. And we're just going to take 5 minutes, and if you can put in $1, a toonie, a 5, a 10, whatever, here's what we're going to do with that. We're going to pay any expenses tonight, although the ticket price, I think it covers it. We're going to pay to keep the Rebel strong in Alberta and to be the house of debate for this subject. So if you think the work we've done is important, please chip in. I should tell you that since we were born not 5 years ago, we have published 13,000 videos. 13,000 videos. That have been watched more than 400 million times for a total of more than 2 billion minutes of good Rebel goodness. And that's just on YouTube. Add to that Facebook and Twitter. We are the largest independent media company in Canada, and our YouTube channel has 1.28 million subscribers. And I wish we got some money for that. We don't. It's a free subscription. But I want to let you know the greatest joy for me, the greatest satisfaction, and the thing that keeps me going, besides these fun one-on-one get-togethers, is the knowledge, and maybe it's a secret that I have that you don't have. Because I get to see the emails and I get to see the traffic stats. I know that when there's 30 negative, shouty attackers in the CBC and the media party, and it feels like you're surrounded because it's the 30 Mean Girls and it's Rosemary Barton on CTV and it's the Toronto Star and it's all, you feel surrounded. No, it's just 30. And I get to see what 1.28 million YouTube subscribers looks like. I get to see the stats and the math, and I know we're not alone. That gives me an enormous feeling of hope. Obviously, you come to a friendly room of 500 allies. It feels pretty good. But it's not 500, my friends. It is more than 400 million since we were born. And we've done that completely based on viewer support, not a dime from the government. So thank you very much for chipping in. That's a Preston Manning move. He didn't have fancy corporate donors.
It was weird back then. I hear that they didn't have the internet so that they could, well, maybe the internet existed, but the same kind of like same kind of like monetary contributions that political websites normally would have used on Nation Builder. It just didn't exist.
Al Gore hadn't invented the internet.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was old timey, Keean, back in the 20th century.
Was it hard back then? I remember actually back when I was chasing Anne McGrath. You might know her. She's a communist. I got a lot
Who
of.
here saw some of Keean's videos taken on Anne McGrath? Oh, she lost her cool, didn't she?
She is a communist. We published the story, and along with the story, we have to provide copy. It's a little bit of text that goes along with videos, so that people who are deciding which video they want to watch, they read the text and they say, "Oh, this is interesting." So I sent the text to our website editor, and in it, it said, back in the 20th century, Anne McGrath ran for the Communist Party of Canada. It was 1984. And without even thinking about it, I wrote the 20th century. And it's because I was born in 1995. So I suppose I was born last century, but I don't really associate myself with it. So I got so much blowback. People were insulted that I said it, actually.
All right. Well, we're going to get back on track. I want to thank you, and Holly and Jaden, you keep going, and Sheila, we're going to put you back on question duty. And I thank you to everyone who has chipped in. Let me just tell you what some of this money is going to go to, because Sheila and Keean are getting on a plane, and they're going to Madrid. Did I tell you this?
No, not here.
They're going on a plane to Madrid. Why Madrid? Because the United Nations Global Warming Conference is being held in Madrid December 3rd or so. I forget the exact dates. When are you going?
Keean, when are we going?
We are going, there's another secret trip before then. I don't know
Okay,
if
we
I
don't
can
tell the
talk about
secrets
it.
Don't tell the
they're
secret trip.
revealed.
I think we're going the second week of the conference. That's when all the fun happens.
So, as you know, Catherine McKenna has asked the United Nations to block Rebel News from getting into the climate conferences. Now, you got into the first one or two. But the
first
thing
one.
is, I got to tell you, Sheila, your reports from the first one and your reports after that, the ones when you were banned were not any less informative. They were not less interesting. You just were, I mean, all you get when you're inside is just endless press releases and
boring.
propaganda. It's
It's
boring.
boring. It's boring.
And
And you're contained. They keep you all corralled
you're
up.
managed.
Yeah.
And so Sheila's been going every single year, and you can see all her historical visits at rebelun.com, rebelun.com. So Sheila's going, and this will be your fourth
Yes, my
fourth global warming conference, and we're going to release the Kraken.
Yeah.
We're going to release Keean.
The Zoomer.
We're going to dress him like a matador and unleash him on Madrid.
That's right. So we're going to send Keean too. I tell you, I pity the Spaniards. They don't know what's coming their way. But between that tag team, now there will be thousands of journalists there. Thousands. But not a single one of them is independent-minded. And how do I know that? Because not a single one of them was banned. So Sheila and Keean, in their own way, will be promoting Alberta's interests. I mean, Jason Kenney's got his $30 million war room for the oil patch, and I look forward to seeing how that thing rolls. But we got our own baby war room with these two. And frankly, I tell you, what Keean did with Greta Thunberg, and Sheila's video on Greta has more than 500,000 views also, I believe pushing back. And people said, oh, you can't criticize her, she's just a teenager. Well, hang on. You said I had to listen to her. Well, you can't have it both ways. And I noticed that the like to dislike ratio on the video, I keep an eye on that, 95% of people thought that your scrumming of her and her handlers was excellent. So it was only the CBC and the media party who, first of all, they were scooped by you, and second of all, you did journalism.
You know, I'm glad you say that, because I didn't check that data. But from the blowback that I got, it was coordinated. It was to my personal email. Someone got my cell phone, actually, and was quite mad at me. My Instagram, my Facebook. The media party and these leftists, they're coordinated and they're vocal. I wouldn't have thought it was just 5% that disliked it.
Oh, it's less than 5%. I mean, you can even see those stats publicly, but all the metrics. That was our most successful video of 2019. Okay, let's go back to the questions.
First of all, I just wanted to, before anything else, I just wanted to say that we all owe a debt of gratitude to Rebel Media here because of the willingness to take a punch in the face or get spit on and all that crazy stuff. Thank you so much. Really, we're grateful. I just wanted to say, as a Albertan, as a Canadian, just thinking this whole process through, it's kind of like you get your thumb smashed with a hammer, and how do you handle the pain? Do you cut your other 4 fingers off? That doesn't seem to make sense either. Grappling with this, I think we're all kind of stuck with what to do here. But as a contract negotiator, I agree exactly with what Ezra had to say, in that it's something that, Trump is a master negotiator, and you have to be willing to make the difficult decisions. You have to say, this is what we're looking for, this is what we expect, and if that can't happen, then I guess you've made the decision for us. We're out. But it's not something that I think we want to jump, pull the trigger prematurely and say this is our decision here. So my question, though, just looking at the fact that Alberta's been, I think the transfer payments are $12 billion, something like that, that we're making. It's been a bleeding process out of Alberta. I think as a starting point, Ottawa owes to reverse that process and start feeding us $12 billion as just a good token, and maybe make up for the last 5 years of our recession to actually pay all of what our transfer payments have been going to Ottawa, reverse that and give that back as just a gesture of goodwill at this point, if nothing else. It's a good thing to put on the table, saying here's how we start a discussion. So my question, though, is how can Alberta ever get fair treatment unless we're willing to plan for an alternative?
Absolutely. As I said, 2 or 3 times, I'm not 100% there yet. But I am quite happy if an independent think tank or the provincial government wants to start planning for that. Because I think merely showing them that we're thinking about it makes it more serious. And do I think that's going to change minds in Ottawa and they're all going to come to their senses? No. But that also saves us another step or two if it comes to having to be independent. Get it started, absolutely.
If separatism is not on the table, then what is, right? Like, how do we possibly convince Justin Trudeau and the rest of the Laurentians that we deserve a better deal? Vote Conservative even more than we did? Well, it was like, I think 76%. 76%, over 3/4 of Albertans voted for the Conservatives, and what, is 80% really going to change anything? I don't think so.
Yeah. You remember in Quebec, before Levant won in 76, they had Lesage in the 60s with Maître chez nous, masters in our own house. That's where it started. They started with the intellectuals, they started with the thoughts, the papers, the debates, 12 years before they got a separatist government elected, and so they were intellectually ready when it was time. France?
Sure. Okay, so there's a couple of things. First of all, if one remembers not so long ago, when Trudeau thought that there was a distinct possibility that he was going to lose, he said that there has to be a way for his party to still be there and be represented, and he tried to create this in an official way. Now, if you really want to consider the fact that the only way you're going to get real power is by claiming the power that is already yours, and that includes your representation on the CBC. And you can, if you need to do that in such a way that that you have a firewall between being able to have your independent business and have a show on their show, the fact of the matter is you need to have that sort of viewership, because there's a very specific way that rebellions are quelled. And Trudeau did exactly what he needed to do, the original Pierre Trudeau, was he went to Scotland. And he went to Scotland to find out, how did you get rid of your rebels? And it's always been the same story. If you look, you guys are going to Spain next week. or when you're going to Spain, you should be interviewing people in Catalonia.
Agreed.
The fact of the matter is you need to know how they destroy you before you figure out. You have to know their next move. And part of their next move, they're already planning it. I could tell you, but it's not pretty. And so the question is, what mechanisms are you going to put in place to make sure that as a conservative group, and if you look over for the number of years, it has been pretty much a blue area for a very long time. Why not say we are a third of the country, give us a third of the representation permanently? No holds barred, no playing games with let's replace people in a Boer War situation. Cheers.
I like what I like what you're saying. You're right. The federal government has a plan, I'm sure. I mean, we heard what Michael Warnick was saying. They were actually planning contingency plans in case the Prime Minister was kidnapped. Can you believe it? But I agree with what you're saying about Catalonia, and it's actually something that's on the agenda while we're in Spain, and something that I hope you watch out for, because we are going to put a video out there. I don't know what the angle will be. I'm sure most people from Catalonia haven't heard of Alberta, so maybe that's not a question to ask them. But asking them, well, what happened to your movement? Because if you remember back about a year and a half ago, maybe 2 years now, everyone thought Spain was breaking up. You know, everyone thought that the region around Barcelona was not going to be a part of the government anymore, of the country anymore. And then now, well, what's happening there? It's almost like there's no news at all, and the separatist movement is completely dead. So I'll go there, just as you recommended, and we'll find out why that is.
We've got time for just 2 more questions. Sheila?
Thank you. So my
He
question,
may not be able to lower his arm now. I'm not sure whether he...
I'm headed there next.
so my question touches around security. The next I'd say few months seems to be crucial time for politicians. And I don't necessarily follow the American news, but I was following the impeachment, pardon me. And one of the concerns that they had brought up were about the 3 amigos, which we do know is Trump and the Mexican, Lopez and Jason Kenney. And one of the concerns the opposition party had mentioned was that they needed to get the deal done right away because of a security risk. So my question is, I'm just going to, can you speak on that?
I don't think I quite understand which security threat you mean. I'm sorry, I don't understand.
Well, there is a deal that they were discussing between Kenney and, the states, Mexican, the 3 amigos. And there was an urgency to get that sealed.
Oh, do you mean the renewed NAFTA?
And that's what I'm wondering what this is all, and if it has any effect on, you touched base on the North and Trudeau deferring things and all of this, if this has anything to do with it.
Got it. Sorry, I didn't understand what you meant at first. I don't think it's connected. I think, free trade with America would be essential for Alberta. We already, our greatest products have free trade with America. And beef, there's no supply management for beef. And we've sold a lot of beef in the States. Go ahead.
Beef.
I guess I got the mic. My name is Len Curl. I'm from Calgary here. And I joined the WEXIT party. As you know, that we need to be fully aware that Prime Minister Trudeau has attacked Alberta. We need to understand that he attacked our way of life and our livelihoods. 100,000 people out of work. And he was worried about 9,000 workers in SNC Lavalin, right? We got over 100,000 workers not working. So my question is, what are we prepared to do? How far are we going to go? Are we going to be like the people of Hong Kong, protesting in the streets?
Lorne?
Yeah, we don't have to know how far we're going to go yet. But we need to start moving on, because there are a lot of things that can happen between A and Z. But you have to know that you're going. And you have to be prepared to start looking at alternatives. Sitting and doing nothing is not an alternative. But you know what, I have to say, as an Edmontonian, I was very comforted by the fact that Naheed Nenshi offered to speak on behalf of the West to the federal government.
Yeah, you're right.
Well, my friends, I said that we would have two questions, and we just had them. I heard one thing out of the corner of my ear that I'm going to respond to very briefly. I heard a lady say France, and it took me a second to understand. I think what you meant is when Quebec separatism was going, there was some noises from France that it would be welcoming of an independent Quebec. And of course, when the French, de Gaulle came to Quebec and said, Vive le Quebec libre, long live a free Quebec, well, that lit a fire in Quebec. And I think that is a very perceptive point. To allies, I gave Trump as the obvious example, but the idea of an or else, you don't even have to say or else if they can see all the or else forming. If this was part of the dialogue in the United States, if this was the dialogue elsewhere, if this was happening, you wouldn't even need to say or else, because they would see it. Well, my friends, it's 8:30, and I thank you for being so attentive and participative. I thank you for your contributions. Special thanks to Holly and Jaden, our volunteers at the front. Thank you to them. Thanks to Sheila for running around with the mic. To Bill, who worked AV. Cheers, mate. Thanks to the Carriage House for hosting us. And my panelists, Keean, Bexte, Lorne, Gunter, and Sheila. Good night, everybody, and thanks for your support.